All right, hello everyone. In this supplemental video, I'm just going to carry on the work that was begun in the lesson video for working with arrays in C Sharp. And so we have the existing solution for question number 1 in the array problems, 1 worksheet. And in this video, we're just going to walk through an implementation for the problem 2 question here, where we're tasked with introducing a couple of methods basically to do the same work, but just demonstrating how we can modularize a solution that still makes use of arrays, and also demonstrates how arrays, being reference types, behave a little bit differently than our typical value types that we worked with to this point with methods. So without, again, wasting too much time going over the details, we'll just walk through the implementation, and then we can use the debugger in Visual Studio to walk through the code and see exactly how the different pieces are working together. So beginning here with question number 2, it asks us to update the solution with the following 2 methods, and we're provided 2 pseudocode signatures. And so the first method here is called getUserNumbers, and it accepts an integer array called numbers as a parameter, and it returns an int value. And now the reason for this particular method to return an int is because, like we currently have in the existing solution, we don't necessarily know how many entries there are going to be. So there's a maximum size for the array. We know that it can hold a maximum of 25, but it may not hold that many. And so the description here that we're given tells us a little bit more about the details of the method itself. So it will be used to do the loading of user input into the array, and it returns the count, or the logical size. So if we go back and look at our current solution, we've declared the variables that we need to work with this solution. We've created the array here on line 17. And in this piece here, where we're looping through and allowing the user to input values and store them into the numbers, this is the part of the code that we'll be refactoring and taking out of the main method and placing into our loading method. The count of the nums in this case will still be tracked within the method, but that's the value that will be returned, so that we can have an accurate count back in the main method here, and we can process anything else we want to do with the array later on. So the first thing I'm going to do is just begin by outlining the method itself. So again, we want to do that outside of the main method, but still within the class scope. So after the main method here, I'm going to introduce this new method that returns an int, and we're told to call it getUserNumbers, so that's what we'll do here. Oops. It accepts as a parameter an integer array called numbers, and it's going to return again an int. Oops, I forgot the static keyword. So static int, that's the return type, the method name, and to call it, we need to provide an array to fill. Now the important thing here is nothing else goes in. So we're being tasked with returning not the array itself, but a count of the values that are placed into it. So that's important, because what that means is this incoming parameter has to already be a reference to an initialized array. It can't just be a variable that can point to an array, because there's no way to return that if what we're returning is the count. So you have to have a somewhat good idea of exactly how the array is going to be worked with inside the method before we go ahead and create the method itself. So the details or the guts of this method are effectively going to be what we already have above. So rather than do a highlight and refactor of the code, I'll just copy or cut and paste it so that we have it where we need it. But this loop here, where we're effectively getting that input from the user, we're going to cut that and paste that here, and then make any updates we need. In this case, for example, we have the max size, but we're not going to know about that now when we come to the loop. So we'll have to make some updates. So let's cut that out. So right here, I'll just put in a to-do comment. Right? I'll just say here, call the load method. So we'll come back to that in a moment. And then inside of our getUserNumbers, we're going to paste this loop. So now we'll see that the loop is, it works, but we require some additional pieces. So the count of the nums, we have the response, and then we've also got a maximum size that we need to update. So since response is only really used for the loading we can take that from here as well. So you'll see the green underline on response tells us it's not being used in this context. So we could just take that. So I'm going to cut that from there and paste that here. So now we have the response. And then also count of nums. But count of nums is also going to be used still back in the main method. So I'm going to need something like that from here. So I'm just going to cut it or copy it, sorry. And we'll have a copy of that here. So again, I'm calling this count of nums, but this count of nums as a variable inside the get user numbers method is not the same as this. We could call this anything. We could call it something else. So let's just do that now. Why don't we just update this? I'm going to call this count, just so that we can explicitly see the difference between how it's used here and how it's used in the main method, right? So the point I'm trying to get across right now is this variable is local and scoped only to the get user numbers method. It doesn't have anything to do with the count of the nums in the main. So now most of this is okay. What we need to do is update max size. Again, we could pass that into the method as well, but all we have is the array itself. So this is kind of where I stumbled a little bit in the previous lesson, but we don't have a max size constant, but we do have the array. So what we can do is reference numbers length, because again, the length of a particular array is synonymous with the physical size. So whether you assign that to a constant here and then use it later, or in this example, I'll just use numbers.length straight away, is fine. So long as we have something that accurately represents the physical size of the array. And so the final thing to do here now, we can see this red underline, is we're not actually returning an int value. And so that's what we'll want to do here. So we'll return the count, and that should complete this method. Okay, so we're not going to put this into use yet, but the important thing here is that it doesn't return the array. It returns only a count of the values. Okay, and this is, again, kind of counterintuitive to what we've already learned about methods in the past, in that things that are passed in here don't exist in other locations. So the idea that we're putting values into this numbers array but not returning that numbers array might seem like, well, we haven't done anything. For example, that the numbers array reference here is going to point to something else, but we'll see that that's not the case. And again, is I think detailed quite nicely in the lesson notes with some diagrams to show you the difference between value and reference types. So let's just complete this now by putting in our comment. So we'll just say here, this loads numbers from the user into an array. Numbers is the array to load, and it returns a count of the numbers, let's say here, loaded. Okay, so that's how this method works. We have an array, we're being tasked with loading it, and then returning the number of values that were put in there. So how many elements, what is the logical size or count of the elements in the array? So to put that method into use, we'll go back up here to where our to-do comment was left. Our count of the nums is going to be assigned the value that gets returned from our call to get user numbers. And we're going to pass in our initialized array here from line 16. So create a new array that can hold 25 elements, and then pass that array reference to the count of the nums. Okay, we'll just pause here because the second method, in this example, the mean average of numbers, works very similarly, but we can get the point across as far as reference types are concerned with just this particular method here. So let's just pause. We'll place a breakpoint on the count of nums, and we'll get to see how this is going to play out. So if we play this program, right, we're broken here at this point in time. Oh, where's my, breakpoints, that's fine. Okay, so we can see the different variables that we're working with. So at this point here, we've got numbers, it's declared. It can hold 25 ints, and we open that up, we can see those values are sitting in here. So this numbers, it says here the value is an integer array, but it's really a reference to where that location is. So once we're paused in this line here, if we step into this method call, we can see execution jumps into the method get user numbers. And here now, locally, we've lost a number of the constants and variables from main, but we can see numbers here is the array that we had initialized in the previous method call. So if we step in, we do some initializations, and in this case, we're now going to prompt the user for some input. We can walk through these statements and see how that's going to work. So I'm paused right now. Let's go into the view. Okay, so come down here. I've forgotten that terminal is now integrated into my Visual Studio. So we'll bring up the terminal, and we're asked with entering a value. So we'll enter in the number 10. Okay, and then we jump back to control here. And so once we've done that, we can see the numbers, again, we can highlight it here, now has the value 10 in the first location, index 0. Okay, and then we're going to increment the count. Nothing here is new. It's all kind of the same that we had seen before. So we can, step over. We'll get a response. So do I enter another number? I'll just enter in 2 numbers to, just quickly demonstrate how this is going to go. So we'll loop around. We're going to prompt for a second value. So I'll enter in 20, and then we can continue. Oops. So no more values, and so we jump out of the loop. And so now our count is 2. We've entered in 2 values. We're going to return that count from this method call back to the main. So count's currently 0 where we initialized it. This number 2 is going to be returned from here. But again, if you look at numbers, which is, again, local reference here, and we open that up, you can see those 2 entries that we made in the get user numbers method call. So even though we didn't return the numbers array, that's fine. We can update the reference type because what was actually passed to the method was not the array itself or a copy of the array. It was just a copy of a reference to where the array exists. So we can modify reference types through method calls without having to return those values. Again, here the important thing is because we can do that, what we need to return is not the array itself. Numbers is fine. It's got the proper elements that we've loaded into the array from the method call in it, but we need to know how many. There's no easy way to determine that. And so that's why the method returns a count. So it's currently 0. And then once we step over, now our count is 2, which is accurate, and we can loop through the array and display the output. So I'll just play it out from here and get rid of this breakpoint, but that's how that works. Okay, and then we can see that the average of 10 and 20 is 15, which is fine. Everything's fantastic. So that's how that works. Arrays, again, being reference types, do not explicitly need to be returned from a method. You can load or work with the elements that are in the array without having to return the array reference back. Now, there is a case where you would want to return an array, and that is if the method created a new array. Then you would need to return the reference to that new array in order to have access to it somewhere else. But in this example, because the array was created or initialized first, we don't have to return it. We can just pass the reference, and then we can make use of the array as we like, and then just come back to the main control, and then we can work with the numbers array in this case and do whatever we need to with it. So that's just a demonstration of how, again, arrays are a little bit different when we pass them into methods and how they can be accessed. So the second method that we'll create here basically takes care of this second piece, which is just to calculate the mean. So the mean variable here will just be assigned the return from the mean average of numbers method call that we're going to implement now. So we'll do that quickly so that we can see that in action as well. So again, I'm just going to do that here. I've got my get user numbers. We'll create a new method. This is, again, going to be a static method. It returns an int in this case. Let's make sure about that. Yeah, returns an integer. So mean average of numbers. Again, this is passed or expects incoming an integer parameter. I'll call it numbers again. It could be called nums or something else. Again, it doesn't have to be named the same as anything else. In fact, when it's called, we don't know about variables anywhere else. So I'm happening to use the same name, but it doesn't have to be that. And then the second piece, again, because we can't just assume that the array is completely filled. We don't want to use the length in this example. We need to also know what the logical count is. And so that's specified here as the second parameter. So the method will return the mean average of the numbers in the array. We get a count here of how many that is. So once we're done that, again, we can do the same type of idea that we had done previously, which is we can just basically cut this code from here. And again, I'll just put in a quick to-do to know that we're coming back here. So we'll call the average method, okay? And I'm going to paste that code here. So again, here we'll have some complaints. So count of nums is unknown. In this context, we refer to the count as just simply count. So we can make that update here. And then the sum is also an unknown variable along with the mean. So we can declare a variable here for the sum and initialize it as well. Sum, because we're only using it now in this context of calculating the mean, you'll notice here it's not used in the main. We can get rid of that here too. So that disappears. And the mean, since we're not really using it anywhere, we could declare it as a variable, but since the mean is what we're going to return, we can just return the expression. So there's no reason to execute or evaluate this expression and store the value in a variable and then return the variable. We can just simply say return whatever the result of this expression is. So we can cut that variable out entirely. And so here, nothing again really changes. We have the array that we're looping through. We have a count that's used in the conditional loop. And then we also have that count here to determine the sum. So that's it. All we're returning is this calculated mean variable or mean value. So again, we can put our comment in here. We can say this calculates the mean average of, we'll say, numbers in an array. Numbers is the array of numbers, and a count is the count of numbers in the array. And lastly, it returns the mean average as an integer. Okay, and so now that method is complete. And so finally, we just need to put that method into action. So we've declared the method. The final piece now is to call it. We already have a local variable here for the mean. So the mean is simply going to be assigned, the return value when we call and pass in numbers, and we also pass in a count of nums. So our main method is shrunk up quite a bit, right? There's not a lot going on in here. We have our array, we have the count of the nums that we get returned from us when we load the array. We then determine what the mean value is, and we display it. So the main has become quite small, but again, because we have good names and things are meaningfully named, the code is essentially self-documenting. So this comment is kind of redundant, but we really don't need any comments in here. It's very short. It's sequential. We don't see any loops in this particular example, so it's pretty complete, pretty simple. And then the methods themselves are also really nicely succinct and contained. So each of them really just does a single task. And so, determining what the mean of numbers is, that's all this method does. It doesn't, again, care how the numbers got into the array, and it doesn't care what you do with the calculated mean and average value. It just calculates it. That's all this does. And likewise, our method for getting the user numbers, it just doesn't care what you're going to do with the array. It doesn't care how it was initialized. It's just going to take the array and ask the user to put numbers in until it's full or they say no, and then that's it. What you do with the array after the fact is up to you. So again, a good modularized solution that in this particular example also makes use of arrays. So I hope you found that useful. Again, I would encourage you to continue working with the remaining problems that are in this problem set. So the question 3, for example, says modify this previous program and add some additional methods. So finding the largest number in the array, finding the smallest number in the array, and finding the mode in the array. These are really good tasks for you to work on and to get familiar with working with arrays and traversing over arrays. Very, very common tasks, and also allow you to get some practice in working with arrays and method calls. And then, of course, question number 4, which builds on problem number 3, putting those methods into action. I highly encourage you to work through this particular problem because, again, it is very closely related, very similar to the assignment that you're going to be tasked with doing. So, all right, I'll see you next time.